This series has taken us from one end of Mount Sharp to the other. Mount Sharp is 57 kilometers long. It rises 5.5 kilometers from the floor of Gale Crater, and it's situated about 5 degrees south of the equator. Now, the images that make up this composite image were made on Sol 45, which was September 20th, 2012. This is late winter. Curiosity landed on August 6 and reported daytime temperatures rising as high as 43 degrees Fahrenheit. So here we are much closer to spring, and in fact the vernal equinox occurred 9 days later, or 9 sols later, on September 29th, 2012. Now, concerning the river along which we have traveled, there's almost no oxygen, no free oxygen, no molecular oxygen to speak of in Mars' atmosphere. 0.13%. So all of the oxygen is tied up in water, water ice, iron oxide, silicates, and other minerals. But the atmosphere contains 95 to 96% carbon dioxide. And so the water must contain a saturation of carbon dioxide, which forms carbonic acid, which is a weak acid, and yet we are going to find Martians in the water in this chapter, as we have throughout the series. Now, our goal in this chapter is to do a roundup. We want representatives of all the various kinds of Martians that we have found, and I'm going to begin this chapter by covering one loose thread that I promised I would get to later. And so we're going to do that first, and then we're going to do our roundup. If you watch this series from the beginning, this image will be familiar. I said when we discussed this image first time around that I would provide evidence that this was a disused, disguised flying craft, and that this feature right here, in the shape of a Bernoulli cross-section of a wing, at some time in the past held a wing or an airfoil or a wing-shaped object whose function we don't know. And in the course of the series, I showed several examples of disguised craft, and in the graveyard in particular, we found not only disguised, disused craft, but also examples with the wings either still attached or lying on the ground. We're going to begin our roundup with the Martians that we found in PIA 16174. The star of our show for this image is right here. We have a gray worker holding a right-angled tube that fits over this ventilation shaft right here. There's another gray worker behind him. You notice they're not wearing clothing. This one is standing in a depression of some sort, so we only see him to his mid-back. In this opening, suffused with blue light, we see the head of a third gray. And then there are sections that appear to be other ventilation shafts So they are subterranean. This is the second group right here. And if you recall, if you watched part 3 of the introduction, we have a pewter-colored craft parked here. There's a gold-colored craft with a knob on top, and it's in flight. It's either just taking off or just landing on this building. And there's a definite shadow underneath it. Now, taking this all in, we have Martians in this opening. This Martian is wearing white. This Martian has an elongated head. And down here we may have a metallic helmet. Now, the other features in this image, there's a structure here, and there's a gold robot or robot-like figure, something out of the Wizard of Oz, standing here. And here we have the eyes and head of a gonzo, the sheath for feeding tube, and the feeding tube. However, I believe that this is a representation. I don't believe this is a living creature. So this is a sculpture for the amusement of anyone occupying this perch. And I will put these two groups in context. So here we have PIA 16174. Here is the lion head sculpture and the opening occupied by one group of Martians, and here are the craft and the building. Now, the grays that we were looking at are up here. And here is our star. Now, if we draw a line through this portion to illustrate this picture plane, or a line through here illustrating the picture plane at this point, these grays are not all that far removed in terms of picture depth from these animals. And yet, compare the size of this gray to the size of these animals. If you watch part 3 of the introduction, I show that there are Martians down here. We're not going to include those in the roundup. If you want to see those, I encourage you to watch part 3 of the introduction. But let's compare images that lie along these picture planes. For one thing, we have a craft here. There's the front of the craft with controls. This is the back of the craft, and the two sections are connected by a shaft. And emerging from an underground opening, we have another gray here. Compare the size of this gray to the size of these animals. This gray is nearly on the same picture plane as the jackal, just very slightly removed. There's another vehicle here, very long. Conceivably, it's more than one vehicle parked back to back, but there appears to be a straight line. Here's the front of the vehicle, and we seem to have a long line here, and there's a Martian here, and there's a Martian here. These two are dressed in jumpsuits, and they're wearing helmets. Now, if you want to see a complete discussion of this image with all its particulars, watch part 3 of the introduction. I'm just showing these Martians, first because it's part of our roundup, but also to illustrate a recurring problem that we have with scale, the matter of scale. So now we can turn to Mount Sharp. This is our first group of Martians, and if you watch Chapter 1, you'll recall that they also present us with a problem of scale, but they're standing in one of the open-air flyers, and we have at least two. This is the area I refer to as the first spa area, and there's reason to believe that the water in this enclosure is heated. We have an artificial structure here, which may be a heater, and this looks like a craft, but there are hoses or pipes that run down into the water, so they may serve to heat the water as well. And there is also this object behind the swimmer. I'll just point out briefly that we have a big-eyed Martian female sculpture here. We have a sculpture of a humanoid with hair, a very human-looking face. And we find human-looking faces in other sculptures in other places. This may be an energy weapon, but we're going to concentrate on this area right here. So let me bring that up. There is a Martian female seated. She's wearing a green jumpsuit. We see her left shin, knee, thigh, a bit of her chest. She's clearly female. She's wearing a dark helmet. Behind her there is a thing, and he appears to me to be a bodyguard. And since he's closest to this female, I assume he is her bodyguard. Muscle-bound, barrel-chested, big-eyed, hairless, shirtless, but he seems to be evidence that the Martians engage in genetic manipulation, because he certainly seems like a mutant to me. He is unique among all the Martians throughout this series. This is the second Martian in a green jumpsuit. He's standing in the hatch of a marine craft. He's wearing a dark helmet. You can see the curve of the shoulders, left arm, back, waist, hips and buttocks, rear left thigh, rear right thigh. And his legs are visible to just above the knee. And this particular Martian is representative of other Martians in a marine environment or associated with marine craft that we saw in Chapter 1, also wearing green jumpsuits and helmets. Now this is the first of what I believe are the rulers. Whether they rule alone or whether they rule with another race, I don't know. But I've shown evidence that these guys are in charge on Mars. These are the big-headed, big-eyed Martians. And this one is also a pilot. Here is a Martian female dressed in a diaphanous white dress. It's cut down to about the shoulder blades in the back. She seems to be wearing a dark bra, white panties. This is not an arm, this is a pipe. I explained this in chapter 1. Her left arm is extended toward the figure on the holographic screen. Both her arms are extended toward this screen, and her hands are turned outward. The figure on the screen is wearing a blue top. It's either a shirt or a jacket, and he is a big-headed, big-eyed Martian. These are the guys in charge, and he's wearing, in this case, sunglasses, and we see these sunglasses in other images also. So she is pleading, imploring, beseeching, or perhaps offering worship. And we clearly have an inferior addressing a superior. Now here we have two Martians seated in chairs. These chairs are above the ground, so they are flying chairs. Apparently this is the flying apparatus. We have a Martian here wearing a green helmet, and we have a Martian here. Their right hands are on the controls on the arm of the chair. They both have the same posture. And this one is also wearing a helmet. So they are flying side by side. We have here an image of a Martian, a male. He's stepping up onto this pipe. You can see that his weight is on his right leg. Head, shoulders, back. His right waist and hip, thigh, lower leg, left thigh, left shin, foot. But there are other Martians on this rigging or platform, and we see other equipment and pipes. Well, here we have two Martians seated, one behind the other. They are straddling the seat. So we have a green jumpsuit, perhaps a dark green, and the one in front is wearing a light colored uniform. And what we notice is that here's the left arm and hand. He is striking the neck of the Martian in front of him. And that Martian is leaning to his left. But this guy is sitting ramrod straight. Now this is the section that I call the menagerie. And we want to look at this area right in here. And we're not going to discuss the animals. We are only interested in the Martians in this chapter. Here's that area blown up. And you can see that we have a Martian here, his head and body. There's a Martian here. Now, this one is facing the animals. This one, I think, is facing toward us, because we have a face with eyes. The left arm is doing something with a piece of equipment here. You can see that there are multiple pieces of equipment or apparatus. And then here, there's another Martian here and a Martian here. Now this is the second example we have of an elongated skull. But in this case, the entire figure appears metallic. Head, neck, shoulders. I suspect this may be a robot. Now, from the menagerie, if we move over to the right and look at the field, we find several groups of Martians. We have a group here. There's another group off in the background here. There's a group in the back here. Another group here. And interestingly, there's a Martian here dressed in a white jumpsuit, and this appears to be a female. But we're going to concentrate right here because the figures are clear. And this is our prime example of a Martian wearing the dark top gray pants uniform. And I've said so many times during the course of this series, head, dark top, gray pants. Well, this is our principal example. Normally, the dark top is complete to the neck, but this is a summer shirt, and it's cut low here, and there's a section, a U-shaped section that appears to be filled with netting. In front of him, there's another Martian. You can just make out portions of the one directly in front of him, and there's a head here, dark top. So we have several here, and there's probably a fourth off in the distance. This uniform signifies either police or security, perhaps military, although we're going to find another example that I believe is military, and the uniform is solid. It's a solid dark blue. These guys are often associated with flying craft. We find them associated with flying craft, but we've also had a few images where they are standing in water, working on craft that are in the water, parked in the water. So exactly what their function is, I don't know, but we're going to encounter them again in subsequent images. Now, this is one of my favorite images of all the Martians. I call this character 007. There's a group of Martians. You can see some in the back. You can see this group. And this one has turned, and he fired a weapon directly at Curiosity. They're all wearing dark uniforms and dark helmets. This one in the back may be without a helmet, and he may be dressed in a blue uniform. But some Martians object to the presence of Curiosity on their planet. And yet, by and large, they've left Curiosity unmolested, which is quite interesting. Now we can take a closer look at this guy. You can see the helmeted head looking directly at Curiosity. His shoulders are angled. The torso. is angled. Here's his right leg, and his weight is on his left leg, but he has fired directly at Curiosity. You can see that it's quite a long flying craft. There's a group of Martians here, actually two separate groups standing together, and on the far side there is another group, all lined up, apparently waiting to board. All the individual green helmets of a large group. In this group we have helmeted Martians, this is a female facing to the left. In her left hand she's holding a light, which is casting a light on the ground, but you can see the jumpsuits, light colored jumpsuits, various colors, and we have a group here, and this appears to be a separate race. They're very tall, and we appear to have two adults and a juvenile, and these are dressed differently. They're not wearing jumpsuits. They appear to be wearing robes, and they are facing directly away from Curiosity, and we don't find this type of Martian anywhere else in this entire series. But I thought, how orderly for this group to be calmly waiting to board a flying craft, when you compare this image to images of airports here on Earth. We gather that Martian society is well regulated. This is the group of Martians that I have referred to as the council meeting. We have seats in the front with their backs to the camera. You can see the back of a seat here, and that the seat is occupied. You can see the top of a helmet here. Here there is apparently a female wearing an Egyptian style headdress. We have the group in white, and they're all helmeted. And all around them we have security personnel. And on the left there seems to be a path that leads up, and there appears to be an individual standing here, perhaps wearing green. Now, it's curious that we have this rough platform covering an opening here. The platform is resting on this strip of material. This group, in whole or in part, is situated on the platform. On the right we have an octagonal prism-shaped object, which gives you some idea of the orientation of the land, considering the angle that this is on. And here we have a precipice, and judging from the color of the earth, this land appears to have been subjected to great heat. We have a Martian here associated with a craft there. We have a craft here, and it has a ring around it. In the back we have a trefoil symbol, and there's a Martian here. Then in the foreground we've got various craft. But the most interesting is this. Here's the nose of a craft. You can see windows. And this craft comes all the way back here somewhere. This craft has been crushed. Now here we have another artificial structure and Martians associated with it. There's a section here and there's a matching section, so we can imagine this coming up and over, forming an entrance. And we have this group of Martians heading down, and we have this group who have gathered along this edge, and they're looking at Curiosity. And these all appear to be bareheaded, but we have a head and shoulders in a blue uniform. Here's a head and shoulders. There's a head and a head and a head. And in the back, this is the right shoulder of a Martian facing right, and apparently he's wearing a dark helmet. And then we have three heads of Martians. These are all on their way down. They're all facing to the right, and you can see this person is looking in the direction that they're traveling. There's another Martian here. See head, shoulders, back, bottom, left arm. And it looks like there may be many Martians. In the back we see these splashes of color and what appear to be helmets. This is an important image, so I have two versions of it. We have a bare-chested male seated in the water up to his belly, and he has a paunch. A Martian here, head, neck, shoulders. He's in water up to his mid-chest. Behind the first male there's a couple standing close together. You can see other Martians in the background. But right here we have a couple. They're about equal in height. The male is just slightly taller. But this is very clearly a female. And then here we have a couple. We see the male's head. We see the female. This is her left leg, bottom, back. Then we have the first couple here. And here we have the second couple. But they are kissing and they are clasped in an embrace. These Martians are uninhibited. We've seen their marine craft, flying craft, both small and large. We've seen small spacecraft, both operational and derelict, giving us something of a history of Martian spacecraft design. In other videos, we find miles-long spacecraft. We find outposts and structures on the Martian moon Phobos, as well as our moon. In fact, some of those structures are so large that they boggle the mind. On the moon there are craters covered with enormous glass domes. Aristarchus is a prime example. It's domed and it gives off a blue light, which some researchers believe is evidence of Cherenkov radiation. We have evidence over centuries of activity on the moon. TLPs, transient lunar phenomena, mining activity, and in this regard, Sanders' Project Golden Dragon comes to mind, and that's a video that everyone should see. In another video, there is a structure, a truncated pyramid structure on asteroid 1999 RQ36-101955 Bennu, BENNU. When you see that asteroid tumbling through space, you wonder how it was possible to build such a structure, and yet there it is. At Rock Nest, we caught a glimpse of a city, and at Rock Nest, as well as Mount Sharp, we have abundant evidence of subterranean dwellings. In other videos, we find illuminated pod-like dwellings spread across the surface. We have seen abundant evidence of not only macroscopic life, but large life. And that not only along Mount Sharp, but all across Mars. There are large trees, sparse herds of animals. I'll leave you with a final thought. Ronald Reagan, in a half-dozen speeches, included comments that he referred to as his, quote, fantasy, unquote. And I don't recall the words verbatim, but he said that if we were confronted by a threat from extraterrestrials, that the nations of the world would forget their petty differences and unite against a common enemy. He finished by asking, is there not already an alien presence among us? And so we are awaiting disclosure or revelation.